Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. The Carbon Beast, written by D. Vessus. Hunched over his home study pod, squishy, green face furrowed with concentration, Bolly tried his best to memorize the elemental body composition of the most recent species to have joined the Intergalactic Alliance. Like every young Lurvian specializing in medicine, it was his job to learn and fundamentally understand the biology of all members of the IGA. Lurvians, as a species, were especially well-suited to administering medical treatment. Statistics would agree. Of all the physicians selected to serve on deep space missions since species-based discrimination had been outlawed, all but one had been Lurvian. The mission, involving the single counterexample, had ended in disaster, with less than 12% of the crew surviving. Should have had a Lurvian doctor on board. Bolly hoped to one day be remembered as the greatest physician of all time. He just wished that someone had warned him how boring the prerequisite biological chemistry course would be. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. Hydrogen. Ugh, Bolly gurgled. He simply could not see the point in memorizing what was depicted on his globe pad, especially when it was so very clearly wrong. No matter how strange a species, there was no way a natural life form utilized carbon compounds for basic structural and metabolic functions. The idea was laughable. It was even written that the species used dihydrogen monoxide as a solvent within the body. That sounded like something pulled straight out of a science fiction night show. Perhaps these humans were a prank thought up by the instructors. Lost in thought and feeling peckish, Bolly extended a pseudopod towards the emitter above his desk, turning its source dial from solar to geothermal to satisfy his energy cravings. He simultaneously immersed the pseudopod in ammonia fountain behind him, taking a long sip of a flavorful liquid. A satisfied rumble spread throughout his body, causing ripples to spread across his skin. Ammonia always tasted best at home. After spending the better part of an hour mulling over the implications of carbon-based life, Bolly came to a decision. He would no longer try to memorize the information, since there was the good chance it was flawed. He was not one to waste his time. His instructors were probably having a grand old time in the pleasure lounge, laughing and bonding over their little prank. Let them. Naturally occurring carbon-based life was surely a joke, but it wasn't a completely unreasonable idea that it could artificially be created. Bolly planned to have that last laugh. Powering down his glow pad and filling up a bottle with ammonia to go, he extended to his full height, a little over 10 centimeters. He was tall for a Lurvian, and oozed over the edge of the study pod towards the portal leading above ground. He had somewhere to be, and that somewhere was the Xenobiochemistry lab at the Lerva Planetary Institute. Whether or not they actually existed, Bolly was going to create a human. Both suns had set by the time Bolly's travel pod arrived at the Institute's metro station. It had taken him a whole day of gliding around Lervanian City to gather all the materials he needed. The 6 ingredients he drilled into his head earlier in the day had been surprisingly easy to acquire. He'd simply had to swing by the local space market to pick them up. The way the clerk had eyed him up for purchasing them all together, Bolly had no doubt that his name would have been submitted to various watch lists for potential drug dealers. It didn't matter. What he was truly making, well, a whole lot stranger, was not illegal to create. Humans, even if they were by some freak chance real, would have been too new to the IGA to be included in the list of universally protected species. There were several other ingredients Bolly had acquired as well, although their acquisition was more complicated. Various minerals required for the synthesis of the strange organism were legally restricted on Lolvo due to their toxicity and danger they posed to life on the planet. These materials included sulfur, potassium, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. To acquire these materials, Bolly needed to contact some old friends whose line of work was less than reputable, to say the least. These friends had not been able to provide some additional trace elements, however, at least not for a reasonable price. Having no other options, Bolly had reluctantly purchased the local alternatives they offered at a discount. Since the amounts needed were negligible, he reasoned the substitution wouldn't lead to any major issues down the line. The final ingredient required for the creation of a viable organism, a complete genetic template, would have been next to impossible to obtain had Bolly been the average Lurvian citizen. Those sorts of materials were simply too dangerous to be allowed in the hands of the general public. Thankfully, he was a registered physician in training. All he had to do was download a few DNA files from the Earth's module of his virtual classroom. Every Lurvian physician in training knew the importance of splicing multiple samples of DNA to create a new individual rather than a clone, and Bolly had been surprised to find several unique Earth samples available for use. His instructors really had set up an elaborate prank. Displaying his student credentials to the portal at the entrance of the xenobiology lab, Bolly nervously pulsed as the opaque disk before him slowly vanished to reveal the room beyond. No matter how many times he created a life form, the artistry of the whole procedure made his heart race. Applying a protective coating to his body to shield against splashes, Bolly quickly got to work. Gliding from bench to bench and working through the night, he used his raw materials to synthesize one compound after the other. The room glowed with the flickering light of the chemical reactions. Finally, once the materials had been suitably prepared, he made his way to the tool that would make all of his hard work pay off. Seeing it always took his breath away. It was the most beautiful work of engineering he had ever laid his eyes on, and the most advanced piece of machinery available to any Lurvian physician. He could transfer a consciousness to a new body or create intelligent life from scratch. He could hardly believe that it was his to play with. Bolly carefully decanted the materials into the central vat of the instrument and spliced the Earth DNA samples to combine them. Uploading the now combined Earth DNA into the instrument's computer, he took special care to adjust the settings so that his creation would come as close as possible to resembling the organism described in the textbook. He wished his teachers had made their description of a human a little more realistic. Taking 26 years to reach full maturity was simply ridiculous. That was over 100 times longer than any natural Lurvian lifespan. Nonetheless, he adjusted the specifications accordingly. It wasn't like he had to raise the thing himself. The machine-created organism would be created completely mature. Double-checking that all the settings were as desired and taking a deep breath, Bolly initialized and activated the machine. He was promptly greeted by several warnings issued by the computer's robotic voice. "Warning! Genetic scan indicates multi-species splice. Cancel operation if unexpected. Warning! Genetic scan indicates dimorphism may be exhibited by this organism. Database search provided genetic sample does not provide sufficient information to implement this feature. If you choose to proceed, dimorphism-related settings will be ignored. Created organism will be capable of independently producing offspring. Warning! Element is substitution detected. Unexpected materials detected in formulation vat. If you choose to proceed, there may be unexpected results." Bolly read the warnings, mentally processing each one. He had not been expecting the multi-species splice. Perhaps the genetic diversity of the humans was much greater than that of the other species in the universe, leading each individual to register as a unique species. There was no way a planet could support multiple species, especially when one was supposedly advanced enough to join the IGA. In any case, he couldn't cancel the operation, not when he was so close to success. The second warning was likely due to the first. It made sense that a database search for his combined Earth sample wouldn't return much information, especially if the machine incorrectly thought there had been multi-species splice. Regarding the lack of dimorphism and the ability of the created organism to independently produce offspring, Bolly wasn't very concerned. Lurvians could choose their form and independently produce offspring as well, and it hadn't led to any issue so far. Perhaps the human wouldn't be very accurate when it came to physiology, but it would be close enough. The third warning was unfortunate, but both expected and unavoidable. He simply could not afford the remaining imported materials. Without a second thought, Bolly activated the life-giving instruments. He would create a human, and in doing so would prove his instructors how ridiculous the claims were. The machine came to life with a hum, its arms moving faster and faster. From the vat, a shape began to emerge. When the procedure was complete, Barley was horrified by what he saw. The sleeping creature was colossal and did not at all look like the cute and cuddly illustration from the medical textbook. Every inch of its skin was covered by hard, crisscrossing scales, completely unlike the sparse fuzz he had expected. A thin membrane stretched between each of the clawed fingers, similar to some aquatic species known to the IGA. A thicker, downy membrane connected its disproportionately long arms to its torso, and bore gills that were supported by thickly muscled, hooved legs. The pointed tips of the large ears twitched, seemingly picking up the racing drumbeat of bodies' hearts. The textbook artist had clearly never seen a human, unless they had. A chilling thought touched Bolly's mind. Just because no planet has been known to sustain more than one species, it didn't mean that it was impossible. If Earth indeed was a home to multiple species, and he had combined multiple genetic samples when creating new life, he was in deep trouble. That sort of thing required specialized training due to the risks involved, and Barley wasn't licensed. He could even be kicked out of school for breaking the law. Perhaps he'd been hasty in ignoring the warning about the multi-species splice. The life form was viable. Under galactic law, termination would lead him to spend the rest of his life mining helium in deep space prison. Barley's only option was to call a lab manager, effectively turning himself in. Then he would have to administer required childhood vaccines to monasteries and make arrangements to have a fully grown newborn chipped off to receive the government education it was entitled. Barley dejectedly meandered towards the communicator located at the opaque entrance portal. As he raised the pseudopod to summon a lab manager, he decided to take one last look over his shoulder at its creation. What he saw made him freeze where he stood. The creature was crouched close to the ground, awake and taking in its surroundings. Even without standing, its head brushed the tall ceiling of the laboratory. Barley whimpered in fear. He had seen how large the beast was when it was being created, of course. It had just looked a lot less menacing asleep. The creature's head snapped towards him, locking him in its all-too-alert gaze. Its yellow and black eyes were mesmerizing, almost making Barley forget about the jagged fangs extending from its snout. Almost. Barley let out a scream and fainted. When Barley woke up and found himself in a medi-bubble in what seemed to be a hospital ship, he was not alone. Hundreds of other Lurvians surrounded him in bubbles of their own, being treated for various injuries. Some were quite gruesome. Observing his reflection, he was surprised to find that he was a fifth of his former size. "Oh, it's great that you're awake," a nurse smiled as she glided over to his medi-bubble. "You were very lucky. We managed to grow you back from your one surviving heart." Barley's face narrowed in confusion. One last thing he remembered was sitting in the study pod, reading about some strange alien. One surviving heart? What happened? Where am I?" The nurse's face fell. "You must have lost your short-term memory, Agro," she said sadly. "But perhaps it's for the best. It would be traumatic for you to relive what could have been easily your death." Barley furrowed his brow, trying his best to remember what could have happened after his study session. Had he gotten a pseudopod stuck in an ammonia fountain? He'd once read an article about that happening to someone, who'd then have to have the whole pseudopod amputated. But he would really have to misuse the ammonia fountain to get a pseudopod stuck. Barley wasn't that sort of Lurvian, and to lose 4 hearts, whatever happened, had to have been much worse. "To start, we're off-planet on a medevac ship." The nurse paused, seemingly collecting her emotions. "There's been a terrorist attack on the homeworld, the worst in history. We were hoping that you would know something since you were at Ground Zero. But if your memories have been lost—" "A terrorist attack? On Lerva?" Barley exclaimed. "Why would anybody want to do something so terrible? The only species allowed within Lervian space are our allies." The nurse nodded sadly. "Turns out that our newest allies, the humans, weren't really our allies after all. It seems that they were just waiting for us to let them in so that they could strike at the heart of our civilization. The IGA thinks they deployed some sort of biological terror on Lerva. Our cities have been toppled, and those who lived there have been eaten. The planet is effectively uninhabitable for us now. Those you see around you are the only survivors." "Why does the IGA think that it was the humans?" Barley asked. In everything that I've read about them, they've been detected as a relatively peaceful species, unless provoked or enticed. Why would they want Lerva destroyed? Our people have never posed a threat to any others." The nurse sighed. "The IGA hasn't deciphered the motives, but they are very sure humans are responsible for the attack. The creature that destroyed our planet is predominantly made up of carbon, a phenomenon only ever seen on Earth. Only humans would have the expertise to craft such a terribly effective weapon from such an unusual material. Besides, DNA extracted from the beast originates from their planet. It seems this thing is even part human. It's practically a closed case." "Carbon-based," he mumbled. Something about that was uncomfortably familiar. Pushing away his unease, Barley forced himself to smile at the nurse. "Please clear me for release from the medic bubble as soon as possible. While it appears my identification cube was lost in the accident, I'm a galactic physician in training and will assist you in caring for the other patients." The nurse chuckled. "Physician in training or not, I need all the help I can get. I'll check your vitals, and if your heart is stable, we'll release you within the hour." Barley felt his heart beat a little faster, an idea taking root in his mind. "Thanks," he smiled. Genuinely this time. The bubble popped, and he was free. "Before getting started, I'm going to need to ask for one last favor." Looking past the sea of injured Lervians, he spoke to the nurse. "I'm going to need a line of communication opened with the IGA's Biowarfare Division. I'm going to need access to the Xenochemistry Laboratory. I think I know how to strike back." As the communication channel opened and Barley stepped into the virtual meeting room, he was shocked to find himself in a room filled with the IGA's greatest xenobiologists, military strategists, and administrators. He couldn't help but feel his chest swell with pride. He hadn't expected to be taken so seriously. There was a chance his plan would be implemented after all. Barley's pride was replaced with shock and rage as he glimpsed at the images suspended on the large screens covering the walls. The once beautiful Lerva had been ravaged. Infrastructure had been reduced to rubble, national swamps and ponds contaminated. The carbon beast had single-handedly brought a mighty civilization to its knees. He was still there somewhere, on the planet's surface, feasting on his people, poisoning the air. Collecting himself, Barley cleared his vocalization organelle of goo, addressing those gathered in the room. He spoke with more confidence than he felt. "Ladyforms and gentleforms, I come before you in the time of crisis. The humans betrayed our trust, extinguished billions of brilliant Lervian lives, and evicted us from our own planet." The room was quiet. The attention of each occupant fixed on Barley as he spoke. "But you know that already. What you don't know is how to stop it." "Get on with it," someone shouted from the back of the room. They were quickly hushed, but it was obvious the others had shared the sentiment. "The beast that roams our planet is unlike any that we have battled in the past," Barley roared. "Neither it nor its creators play by any natural rules. Our planet may have been lost, but we cannot give up. Carbon-based life is inherently unnatural, and its domination of the galaxy must be prevented. Unfortunately, we are not physically equipped to defeat such foes. Humans, if they are anything like their creation, are simply too powerful. Our only option is to fight fire with fire." "What are you proposing?" a stern voice called from the crowd. Barley singled in on the voice, locking eyes with the Commander-in-Chief and the Intergalactic Alliance. This was his chance, the chance to rise above his station, the chance to be remembered not as the greatest physician of all time, but as a war hero, the savior of his people. More importantly, this was a chance for him to scratch the nagging itch in the back of his mind, the feverish curiosity that filled him, for whatever reason, whenever he thought about carbon-based life. The room had fallen silent at the question. Standing before the crowd of bigwigs, Barley spoke directly to the Commander-in-Chief. "Humans and their creations may be unstoppable for now, due to their strange elemental composition. They may hunt us as prey and drive us from our homes. Our only way out of the pit we find ourselves in is to reset the ecosystem. Humans cannot be allowed to sit at the top of the food chain. We must take this fight to Earth." He took a breath, making sure the impact of his last statement would be felt. "I propose we create our own carbon beast." Far below the IGA fleet, on the surface of Lerva, all was still. Silver towers that had once touched the sky lay broken and tarnished in the mud. Travel pods sat empty at their stations. A single living creature remained on the planet, its labouring breaths punctuated by shrill wails. It was a social animal left all alone. It was miserably lonely. The sad beast lay in a den it had made for itself, curled up to protect against the frigid wind blowing through the ruins of the Lurvinian city. Eventually, the wailing ceased, the laboured breaths eased, and then stopped entirely. But life had not left Lurva. 6 wrinkly pups nuzzled their parent, searching for milk even as the body cooled. Finding no succor and growing hungry, the pups eventually wandered off on their own to search for food. They would not return nor meet again until they were mature. As months turned to years, the pups grew in size and changed in form. They spread to every corner of Lurva, waiting for the day they could themselves usher the next generation of pups. The beasts were social creatures. They would make sure that they would never be alone again. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.